So thank you, Dr. Noubar Afeyan, for agreeing to sit down with me today and for the first time in the past 2 years, talk about our project on the record. We have spent the past 2 years developing, iterating, implementing parts of this project, and did a formal launch of our foundation, the Armenian Spiritual Revival Foundation, in May. And this is the second opportunity that we are going to speak about the project, the foundation, its projects, and zoom in more detail. Why we're doing this, what moved you towards this initiative, and what is the great vision behind the foundation. So thank you for agreeing to talk about this.
It's my pleasure, Rabbi.
So what is the big story that we want people know about the Armenian Spiritual Revival Foundation?
Well, look, the project has its roots in the past 25 years of various undertakings, various projects that I've been involved in, co-founding and driving. They all are dedicated to the progress of the Armenian country and Armenians all around the world. And we never once thought that we would need to also focus on things that happened to us that are traumatic, because we were largely using the trauma and the survival story from the Armenian genocide to draw lessons and deliver them to the world through our other projects, for example, the Aurora Humanitarian Initiative. But in 2020, what occurred and the type of war and displacement that occurred for the first time produced a lot of victims and a lot of trauma. And that took us back to thinking, well, this is something that we should know how to deal with, because I've always viewed Armenians as becoming super survivors, in the sense that we've gone through so many survival stories that what's left of us are people who know how to survive. But it occurred to us also that it's hard to just survive and stay there, because a lot of people who survive trauma basically get depressed and they just aren't functional. But the question is, how do you then revive? And so the general context for this project, and then when it was brought up 2 years ago in discussions I had with some church leaders and then with you, really was about, can we channel our historic experience in order to provide pathways to revival to folks impacted by the trauma of the war, of the pandemic, and then most recently we've had the ethnic cleansing in Artsakh. And so it seems like, while we would like to do less of this work because we wish there weren't traumatized people, there's even more need for the work. So that's really how we started.
Interesting. And you're talking about survivalism and Armenians being a super survivalist nation. But this project, I think, is also about, as you said, channeling the historical experience to propel revivalism, isn't it?
Yes. So, I mean, I think there's a journey, in my work context, which is ironically very much also about survival. The type of business organization that is constantly confronting failure is a startup company. And since I specialized for the last 38 years in creating startup companies, these companies are constantly fighting for their survival, but then they need to get up on their feet and start building value, and that's revival. And then eventually they will reach a point where they can thrive. And so that journey, which we see in the private sector, is equally applicable at the human level. And so the question is, just like in our businesses where there are many examples, case studies, mentors who help that journey along, and it could be psychologically pretty traumatic to spend 2-3 years doing something and having it completely fail. There's a lot of support in that world. There's somewhat less support in this world, we found. Certainly there are specialists, psychologists, psychotherapists, but it's a pretty unique journey when you're given a second chance at life, and then you try to find meaning in that. So I think the revival part is the key. That's why the project and the foundation is called Armenian Spiritual Revival Foundation. But without survival, there's no revival. Without reviving, there's no thriving. And so we really focus on the reviving part.
So you're talking about this as a journey, this revival as a journey, but you're also talking about the uniqueness of different approaches that you apply in different social entrepreneurship and other business projects that you lead. This project is focusing on, or is branding itself as one offering psycho-spiritual journey. What's in there? What is the...
Yeah. So, I mean, look, when one of the key things that cause people to want to revive and then believe that they can actually succeed in the journey is a form of faith. Some people who don't have religious faith derive that faith from within. They kind of feel inspired by other examples. Maybe they study, other previous heroes who survived and went on to change the world. Elie Wiesel is an example, and Nelson Mandela, and there are these figures. But then you could imagine that somebody impacted by the war in Armenia may not really relate to those people. And another source of faith actually is the experience of the nation, in particular, the spiritual traditions of the nature and our Christian faith, which really has been the keeper of our history, identity, for centuries and centuries. And so we thought, can we collaborate with the church, Horiech Miazin, and the academia around it, essentially people who are doing research, to help us identify motivating stories that could help guide the modern day survivors to be propelled to get faith and confidence in their abilities sufficient to go on the journey. So, if you think about the story of Khorvirab, that is a survival story. And within our church, the whole foundation of the church is by a human, Krikor Lusavaric, who after being put in a pit for years and years under dire conditions, survived, revived, and built the church that lasts here 1,700 years later. That's a story that can be very inspiring. There are many other ones. So we thought by saying psycho-spiritual, we should meld the best thinking in how human motivation works, how different people may have experiences differently, and then combine that with elements of the spiritual faith that we have to do the best we can in having these people go forward in the journey.
So we're talking about sort of helping or nudging the modern day survivors and enabling them to tell their stories, to help others, to help themselves in the first place. Because of the war and its continuing consequences, there is also a sense of despair and helplessness, part of which is probably learned helplessness in Armenia because of internal, external, different factors. How do we want this situation probably to be altered by the projects of this specific foundation?
Well, look, I think people, especially if they've been traumatized, lose agency in their own lives. And it's easy to feel victimized, to feel disadvantaged, to feel hopeless, helpless, and then finally to give up. And they may have a family around them, they may have friends, they may have a community, but often none of those people know how to deal with these situations either. It's not common knowledge how you deal with people that are feeling despair as a result of the conditions that they've witnessed. And by the way, people who are impacted physically by war have their form of trauma. People who survive arbitrarily in war, where the person next to them dies and they survive, have a different kind of trauma in the sense that they feel kind of lucky, but at the same time guilty for what happened to their friend and colleague, especially in war. So these are all distinct journeys. And I think what we need to do is to build in people a sense of agency, a sense of control over their own lives. Whether that's motivated by the family that needs them, the friends that want them to recover, examples through our project and others that this can be done. Because the thing you have to believe is that this can be overcome. There's a lot similar psychological things happen when it comes to being diagnosed with a serious disease. You could give up. You could feel like, why me? and I didn't deserve this, and I'm probably going to die. And then you don't even put up a fight, and then that will be what happens. Other people decide, even if there's a 1% chance, I'm going to fight back, I'm going to get better. And if there was a 1% chance, 1 out of 100 of them may actually survive. But for sure, the ones who don't do that don't survive. So I think those are things that, even though it's difficult to rationalize this because people are often not in a state to really think of things objectively, but with help, and importantly, with the type of storytelling and narratives that can be helped to be composed. So in other words, you want the person that's affected and the people around them to help compose a narrative that guides them out of the situation they're in. I think all of those things can be facilitated and aided. People go to gyms, they go to school, and they have teachers and coaches to help them do something better. We are doing that for people who need that type of coaching to be able to get themselves to a place where they may need less of it or none of it at all.
Let me connect a few dots here between different other initiatives that you have been guiding and supporting over the past more than 2 decades. Earlier this morning, at the launch event of a different initiative, you were talking about the essential strength of our nation that needs to be explored and expanded given present circumstances. 2 days ago, we unveiled this, I think, very emotional and beautiful monument to Aurora Martikanian, the person behind the Aurora initiative. This history and operationalization of history, how can we expand on this? How this can be put to serve the people in need today, the people in need of spiritual revival? What can we do to help them contextualize their hardships in the history of Armenian people and the history of their families, etc.?
Well, it's an interesting question, and it's an interesting time to ask this question, because in the current political discourse in the country, there are observations that are made about how reliving the memory of the past may actually hinder progress and may actually hurt prospects of regional peace. And there's probably some truth to the fact that it could. But if you ignore what good it can do in helping people derive the strength from their own history to fight back and to survive and to revive and to become future Armenians, having recovered from the alternative, that's the good that can come out of it. So there's always in both nature and in human experience, things that seem to be causing challenges often have an advantage if they've persisted for a very long time. History of survival and the kind of a resilient church and a resilient narrative and personality that Armenians have developed. We survived. We were among the most kind of successful, let's say, Soviet countries after kind of the First World War. That's a form of survival, and we could have been lost. We had too few people. We could have just dissolved into some version. So I look at all that and I say, that's the solution. That's the source of solution for us. The solution is not learning from other countries or learning from realpolitik or whatever. So I think when it comes to these people, I view our rich history and as our strength, and we need to bring it forward and deliver it in a contemporary, contextualized way.
So we're not only super survivalist people, you're saying, but also revivalist.
We very much are. That's the story of certainly the diaspora, where, Armenians in Armenia didn't have, revived in their own way by being as good as they could be as part of the Soviet Union. They led in music, they led in science and education, in many chess, many things, even humor, with Radio Yerevan all these years. And so what's that about? Well, that's just revivalism. And if you change the context and you take people in New York or Paris or Lebanon, they did the same thing. We now need to bring all that experience and the confidence that comes from that experience, knowing about it, to the modern day reality for these folks that have now been given a second chance at life and might not know what to do with it.
Exactly. So in the past 2 years, we have designed, piloted, and tried different projects and approaches. And over this period, we have provided psycho-spiritual support to about 1,300 people, and a similar number of people benefited also among those that were forcefully displaced from Artsakh in our projects. And all this has given the foundation the opportunity to learn, to improve its approaches, and design what now we brand as Armenian revival journey, which is, as you said, helping people, nudging them in the direction of developing their own narratives for their own revival. Who do you think this project is aimed for? We are obviously saying that this is open to everyone, but who do we imagine to benefit this approach and this project maybe in the first place? Who would you call? Who would you urge to apply for this project?
I mean, I think first of all that sometimes people have a hard time knowing that they're carrying the burden of a post-traumatic stress. There's, I'm sure, some kind of bravado, macho sense that, particularly in men, that they are not affected by it and they don't cry and they don't this and they don't mourn. And but people around them will know. And so I think it's easier to say who it's probably not as useful for, which is people whose psychological condition has deepened in a way that it is manifest in physiological ways and who may need combined therapy to improve their mental condition and their behavioral condition, as well as certain physical, through potentially some physical interventions as well, medicines, etc. And those, I think, is important to distinguish, because if what we do somehow falsely denies them proper care, then it will make us look less successful than we actually are being, because it's being overused. But I think you've obviously been leading in that direction. Other than that, I think that it is certainly not harmful, right? So if you said, does somebody have to have 10% post-traumatic stress, 20%? I don't think there's any such thing. I think that if somebody has the sense that they might benefit, they should try it. And we're trying to make as many scalable ways of doing this so that it's not, the individualized version of this may be appropriate for some people at some times, but the group version and the larger teams that you're deploying, I think all of that could make it useful to a broader set of folks. You might say, well, what about somebody who's disappointed with their lives, or underwent a divorce, or underwent, kind of is dealing with a sickness? What about them? And I think in the fullness of time, the psychospiritual revival approach may reach such people to get, again, agency and learn the techniques to take control over their revival journey themselves. But I'd rather we start with folks that have a more acute condition triggered by some recent events, because it'll be probably easier to deal with that, and with some common approaches. The more different the source of the trigger to feel this way, the more we may need to really gain experience before knowing exactly which version to use.
Well, I think this is a good opportunity also to mention that, unlike where we started 2 years ago, now about 1/4, about 25% of those that are applying to use this opportunity are men, including, in the first place, men from other regions, not Yerevan, which means that the foundation is providing this non-blaming, non-stigmatizing opportunity to both men and women to stand on this journey and walk in this Armenian revival journey, and we intend to even enrich this opportunity for people. What do you think is our main message to the population at large and those that are maybe doubting whether they should use this opportunity or not. Why would we encourage them actually to try this?
Well, I mean, look, this is a form of help in recovering from something that's adding to the complexity of people's lives through potentially a real severe condition, that's maybe due to war, due to displacement, refugee, all of the things that follow. And, I think people should do it as a way to increase their likelihood of reviving. Like vaccines, which is something that I know a little bit about. Vaccines are supposed to be extremely safe because you want them broadly used and because they are protective or they're enabling to health. Here, this is also enabling to people's functioning back in the way they did before, if not better, and it's meant to be very safe. So if we truly can demonstrate the safety of the approach, then I think spending a lot of time trying to figure out whether to use it or not, instead of trying it and seeing what effect it has, that becomes very, very different. So I think safety of the intervention, the fact that it shows to your family and support groups that you're trying, and then with some likelihood of success, if it changes your path, then hopefully you come back and you encourage other people to participate. Because the best people to attract others to participate in this type of narrative psycho-spiritual approach is people who've undergone it.
And the foundation, maybe to add a few words, and the foundation is also looking into opportunities to create these local resilience networks to help those who undergone the process, encourage others. And
yes, obviously we don't want to do this and then walk away for the rest of their lives. There has to be some networks that are involving participants with some facilitation by our foundation. Obviously, there's a trade-off between how many new people do you impact versus how many of the existing folks do you keep in an impacted state. But I think we can do both and scale at an appropriate rate. So yes, definitely the foundation takes it to be their mission to see the effect last as long as possible. And I wouldn't be surprised if after a period of time somebody needs to participate again because, whatever it is they told themselves and they taught themselves to believe may have now new data that causes them to doubt it again. And look, one of the ways broadly in which religion helps people is this. The problem is that religion alone, without modern day psychological, I'll call it technologies, not just techniques, isn't potentially able to be as applicable. And so if people are deriving their learnings, their guidance, their inspiration from God and the teachings of Jesus Christ, and they can do these things, then by all means, they should just do that. But for the vast majority for whom either they're not familiar with that or they really need more personal kind of coaching, I think that's something that we can do.
You mentioned religion and faith not once over this conversation, and we have discussed and developed many ways and are looking in more ways on how more meaningfully to utilize this partnership that we have with the Holy Echmiadzin in the Armenian Apostolic Church. And probably it is what we rely on for the continuation of journey for many of our beneficiaries or the participants on the dioceses and the clergymen of the Armenian Church, who we also want to empower and help them thrive and make thriving, mission in their own communities, aren't we? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, look, I think the Armenian Church, which has been part of the Armenian identity for 1,700 years, has kept the torch of helping the people cope with all sorts of adversity. And at the time, there was no governments, there was no other institutions, and it was really the only way to keep the language and the culture and the health of the population active. Over the years, as other institutions have been built up, as we now have an independent republic, the church's role does not diminish, but it can be leveraged in many ways, the way we're choosing to leverage it, because they have the historic memory and the legitimacy to actually help develop the materials that can make sense to people, even as they're trying to search for whatever motivates them to get on this journey. At the same time, the church has its own teachings in Gemaran, which aims to give clergymen tools by which to be able to deal with not only the spiritual needs of their flocks, but also their psychological needs. But I would contend that what we're developing here is probably several steps beyond what is achievable through just church teachings. And we'd like to merge that into the mission of those clergymen who want to, let's say, specialize in delivering this type of care. And so we expect to learn things from the church. We also expect to deliver value to them. And over time, I expect that the church will play a greater role to get involved in the treatment of even some of the worst cases who may benefit from physically being co-residents with various monasteries and various church dwellings where they can actually, if they want, immerse themselves with that type of a self-discovery and realization with a lot of prayer and a lot of support. That's an approach that can benefit from learning of the things we're learning, but it's not in and of itself the same journey.
So our conversations in the past 2 years on this topic tend to last for hours, but today it seems that we have managed to keep it shorter. And my last question is about your vision for success of the foundation. It has obviously been established by your approach and your vision on how better mental health services can be provided to the populations, and not just in Armenia, by the way. We haven't spoken about this so much today, but maybe beyond Armenia, using our own experience. I want to ask about our vision for success of the foundation. What do we want this foundation to achieve in the next 3 to 5 years, so to say, to think that, okay, we have tried?
Well, I think that impact measured in people's lives and livelihood and feeling that they are on a better path and they attribute some of it to the interactions they had with us is one measure of success. The amount of trained psychologists and clergymen who learn the ways of this fusion, psychospiritual revival fusion, is another way of measuring impact, because inevitably they'll be using these learnings to do their work, whether it's exactly following the particular approach we are or not. I think that impact can be measured. I think that one way impact can be felt is how extensively it's available throughout the Marzes and the capital in Armenia, but then as well through perhaps the church and other means in the rest of the diaspora, because while the diasporans are not suffering as much from trauma of a war, although there are places in Lebanon and Syria, and unfortunately Jerusalem and Ukraine and maybe Russia, and I can make a long list, who are suffering from similar trauma, but also other forms of trauma will begin to be benefiting from this. And I think the Armenian branded side of this should be a great opportunity for clergy around the world to add to their mission, to add to the services they're able to render. And I know that there's plenty of at least North American clergymen who have expressed interest in engaging. We don't want to do that prematurely. We want to make sure that what we have is working. And then, as you mentioned as well, I could foresee a day where, at least through the Aurora Humanitarian Initiative, where we are identifying every year hundreds and hundreds of worthy kind of saviors of other people's lives, whose work puts them in touch with lots and lots of survivors. Well, then why not think of how this approach can be delivered at the point of need in Sudan and in Myanmar and in Yemen and in Gaza and many other places where undoubtedly the future and past winners of the Aurora Prize will come from. So imagine a day where there is a package of psychospiritual revival that's delivered, but it has to be localized. We cannot give people just a story of Armenian survivalism to help people in Rwanda confront elements or Ethiopia with famine. So I think we can imagine all we want. The reality is there is a need. We have to figure out how to fill the need and then how to scale.
Thank you, Dr. Noubar Afeyan, for believing in this mission and supporting this mission since the day one, and co-authoring, I should say, all of our projects that we're implementing.
And thank you for everything you're doing as well. You're doing a great job. Thank you.